Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Legaltech Around the World series. I'm Terry Modishead, the Executive Director of the Centre for Legal Innovation, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome our collaboration partner for this series, In Counsel, and of course, In Counsel's Managing Director, David Bushby, who has kindly agreed to act as the facilitator and the host for this series. Hi, David. Great to have you here.
Thanks, Terry. Pleasure to be here.
David's going to introduce you to this fantastic panel in just a few seconds. Again, absolutely delighted to welcome you. And with that all being said, I'm going to hand over to David and this truly amazing panel. Welcome again.
Thanks very much, Terry, and a big welcome to everyone out there listening. Welcome to the very first instalment of the Legaltech Around the World series, brought to you, of course, by the College of Law Centre for Legal Innovation. As Terry said, my name is David Bushby from In Counsel. I'll be your host throughout the whole series as we travel around this globe of ours. Today, we've got four fabulous founders who are leading the charge in the Aussie and New Zealand legal tech space, which is, of course, Australia, the first market on our round the world tour. So with that said, I'd just like to introduce everyone very quickly. We've got Sasha Kirk, co-founder and chief marketing officer at Legaltech. She's based in Brisbane, Australia. G'day, Sasha.
Hello, how you going?
Good. Laura Keeley, founder and managing director of Immediation, based down in Melbourne, Australia. Hi, Laura.
Hi, everyone. How are you?
Michael Patterson, also in Melbourne, Australia, who is the founder and CEO of Contract Probe and also the immediate past president of the Australian Legal Technology Association, aka ALTA. G'day, Michael. Good to see you again.
Hi, David. Good to see you.
And finally, we've got Jean Turner over in New Zealand, based in Wellington, who's the managing director of Lawhawk. Hi, Jean.
Yeah, hi, David. Thanks. Hi, everybody.
And just to set the scene, I think it would be good, apart from just a quick hello, just to understand where everyone is at in their journey and get a quick introduction from each of our founders. So if I can just invite you to do, your personal super quick elevator pitch. And I might just start from the top again. Sasha, do you want to kick us off with what you do and who you are?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Sasha, co-founder and chief marketing officer at Legaltech. Legaltech is a two-sided legal operations platform that in-house legal teams and their law firms use for intake and triage, matter management, client collaboration, and legal spend management. And I think what really sets us apart is two things. The first is the secure two-sided infrastructure that we have between legal teams and their law firms, and allows for streamlining of instructions, agreeing scope of work and budgets, and for matter management and collaboration. And then secondly is Legaltech Intelligence, which is our intelligent automation engine, and it provides highly configurable no-code automation, workflows, and reporting at every stage of the matter lifecycle. As David said, we're headquartered in Queensland, and we've got a large number of corporate and government clients, as well as over 170 law firms registered on our platform.
Brilliant. Laura, over to you.
Thank you, David. Hi, everyone. I'm a barrister in Melbourne and the founder and now CEO. Recently, having hung up my wig of mediation, that just happened 2 days ago, David. So I started a mediation really in response to what I saw at the bar was massive issues with access to justice. So we provide online dispute resolution, but we also provide legal video collaboration tools that really give judges, lawyers, arbitrators, and mediators the tools that they need to replicate their normal job in real life in a digital environment. So we specialise in these digital legal environments and we craft them for our clients using our legal innovation team. And that extends all the way through, for example, to case management and complaints management holistic systems. We do integrate with DMS and CMS systems too, so that lawyers can go straight from their case file into a specialised secure video call with all of their documents and drafting available. And our most exciting news is that we are based in Melbourne and Perth and Sydney, but have recently entered the United States as well. So that's a really exciting development for us over the past few months.
Absolutely. A few big milestones there, Laura. You also did a capital raise not too long ago as well.
Yeah, it seems that the capital raising train is always on the go. So yes, we're in the middle of closing another tranche right now, but it's always fun. And we love our investors, David, particularly our Australian ones.
Yeah, brilliant. And Michael as well, can you just give us a quick pitch on what you do and who you are?
Yeah, sure, David. Thanks. Yes, as David said, I'm Michael Patterson. I'm the founder of Contract Probe. Contract Probe is a machine learning tool that reviews and responds to draft contracts. So a company or a law firm can upload a contract into Contract Probe and receive, within 60 seconds, a complete markup of the contract with the changes that Contract Probe suggests be incorporated into the contract, fit for sending to the other party. And by doing this, cutting down, by some estimates, 40% of the time taken in reviewing contracts by either a corporation or a law firm. If you don't want to mark up, Contract Probe also produces tables of departures for use in tender evaluations and negotiations, and it can do that in either Word or Excel format for all those lawyers who have graduated to using that wonderful tool, Excel.
Great, thank you, Michael. And finally, Jean Turner in New Zealand.
Yeah, thanks, David. So I'm Managing Director of Lawhawk, and for the last 5 or so years, we've been helping customers to improve and automate their processes. So we're not really a legal tech platform ourselves. We just help our customers to find the right technology that will work to help them to solve their problems, and then we'll help them to design, build and support solutions for them that continue to work in any other way that they're best able to.
Okay, great. Well, let's dive into, I guess, some of the first questions that we have in this first hour, and I will try and keep some of these questions consistent across the board into different jurisdictions, but I thought as a logical place to start for us is just looking at some of the headlines in this AU-NZ legal tech market. And Jean, just to kind of stick with you here, what are you seeing in the headlines at the moment? What's grabbing your attention?
Well, there has been a lot of corporate activity and fundraising activity over here, perhaps more than what I would have actually first sort of thought until I started looking into it. But we've obviously got quite a strong anti-money laundering identity verification sector here, and so a couple of companies have had some big raises or exits. So CloudCheck, they were recently acquired February this year, in fact, for $20 million with a potential $8 million further earnout. First AML just raised $21 million at the end of last year. That was US for a Series B. In September last year, Fortify, which was it's a neat little company that Potter IP, a trademark company here, set up. They sold that for $8 million with another $3 million potential earnout to an Australian company. And Lawview, many of you might have heard of, in the sort of matter management space, they raised $17 million in August 2021. So they're going very well. June 2021, Leap acquired Infinity Law, which will be the main practice management system that's been used in New Zealand by many firms for many years. And that's obviously going to have some impact on the market over here, and also acquired SoftDocs. And if we go back just a little bit further, there was McCarthy Finch, which was an AI platform that was partly owned by Minter Ellison Rudd Watts, one of the large law firms over here. That was sold to Onnit. And ActionStep, which most people probably wouldn't necessarily even know as a New Zealand company, but it's one of the better known practice management systems. At the end of 2020, they also sold 84% of their ownership to Serent Capital to help their growth into the US market. So yeah, there's been quite a lot of activity in a relatively small market down here.
Yeah, definitely. It's a small market, but plenty of activity, and that sort of fits the trend I see, at least globally. And the amount of M&A activity and capital raising that happened in 2021 was astounding, actually. A record year, I think, by all accounts. If we look at the Australian market, we had a number of relatively decent raises for an Australian perspective. Smokeball, again, part of the Leap, family there. You've got $30 million raised. Pursuit did 20 million, Lawpath 7.5, Checkbox 6.3 million, Immediation, of course, 3.6 million, and more to come, it sounds like. And we also had Joseph at a small seed round of 2.5 million. So I haven't quite done the numbers in terms of per capita or per market sizing of how active that would be in our respective jurisdictions, but it does feel quite active. Does anyone else have any kind of headlines or things that they've been keeping an eye on in our markets?
Jean referred to the acquisition, David, of an IP registration service in New Zealand. We had something similar in Australia in July when a listed intellectual property firm, IPH, acquired Applied Marks, which was an Australian online automatic registration of trademark platform. Been going for about 5 years. they acquired Applied Marks for $5 million with a $2.1 million earnout. So similar type of figure and similar type of acquisition has occurred in New Zealand.
Yep. Any other headlines or stories that people are following?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting environment, and there's so many sort of drivers and changes. And I think when we're looking at that investment landscape, I think a couple of headlines are, people are corporates, law firms, they're buying technology, which is great news for us. So a lot of the organisations, a lot of legal tech companies are seeing quite a lot of growth, which is absolutely fantastic. But I think, Australia is a small market, and I think where we're seeing these investments at the moment, and I think definitely in the investments that will be coming this year, it's going to be around market expansion. So, mediation doing some amazing things in the US, as are some, other legal tech companies, other organisations like, ourselves at Lawcadia. We're sort of putting our attention on Europe and the UK. And that's kind of where we see a big, some big growth opportunities. Having said that, Australia still is, we're still not at that market saturation. There's so much growth opportunity left in Australia. But I think certainly from an investment point of view, investors are looking at, very significant growth. And I'm just not sure that if a company is just focusing on Australia, that they will necessarily get those sort of big investment numbers. I think what I would love to see is more investment coming from Australian investors. Having said that, there are, some good US and European companies that are looking to invest in Australian businesses, because we have a great name for ourselves in terms of what we're doing in Australia.
Yeah, we'll definitely
and New Zealand as well. Absolutely, I can't forget New Zealand. Yeah.
Absolutely, we'll definitely touch on that idea of looking to overseas markets, into the bigger markets. We'll talk about that for sure. And Laura, I wanted to quickly give you the opportunity. Any headlines in this market that catch your attention?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Ansarada moving into that listed environment was really interesting. We haven't seen many Australian listed techs, and so that's something that I guess we're keeping an eye on as to untapped potential in the listed market in this sector. Traditionally, I think everybody's stayed pretty small and hasn't necessarily taken VC money, although I think some have tried, but I think we definitely have their attention now. And the Americans, I think, are definitely looking down here. That's my experience. Once we were in TechCrunch in particular, got a lot of reach outs from the New York investment banking and private equity markets, where I think they're spending a lot investing in technology from the States. So it's really good that we can start to play, I guess, in the bigger markets. And we tend to produce a lot of great ideas in Australia and New Zealand, and for export. Be really good to see, I guess, more of the Australian law firms taking the lead, I think, on buying rather than waiting for, the US to go first. That's one of the observations I have, particularly in our category, is that they hold back a little more, waiting for the global partners to sort of lead the charge in some of the edgier legal techs that are out there. So I'd like to see the Aussie firms.
Yeah, it was interesting with the Ansarada IPO. Then you also had the IPO of the Dockyard, and then very shortly after, the merger between the Dockyard and Ansarada. So
well, it's interesting how they did that. And Stuart's company went first. Dockyard was smaller, and it was almost a reverse scenario. But I mean, just interesting that they're in the listed market, and that's pretty rare from what I've seen in our space here.
The only other IPO I can think of that's a bit related to law tech was the Nuix IPO.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Unfortunately, I'm not sure that that's helpful, because at the moment it's always been a bit of a train wreck. So
I was avoiding mentioning.
Yeah, with the most respect for for anyone who's involved in it, but as a person who wants to attract more investment money and more opportunities for the legal tech space, I think unfortunately that what we're seeing with Nuix just makes me as a founder go, oh my gosh, this is really not something I would ever want to replicate. I'm sure other people might share the same views.
Well, I think it is good technology when you look under the hood, but
absolutely.
The external circumstances leading around its float and the subsequent management changes is something that we probably all want to distance ourselves from.
Yeah, I mean, and that's just the nature of going through an IPO and deciding, making that strategic decision to be a listed company. unfortunately, you know, everything is out in the public arena for everyone to have their, you know, their 2 cents say in, and that's, you know, I sort of see that's definitely the downsides of taking that investment option.
Talking further about getting investment from United States firms, are you experiencing resistance there to US firms investing to non-US firms? Because the US can, of course, be quite parochial. And I have heard some companies say that US firms really want, for example, to see the companies they're investing in to have a US company and that, to put the investment into that. And so they're sort of not as simple as waiting for them to come over here and invest it. There's the bit that we need to do to make ourselves attractive to them. Is that consistent with your experiences?
We set up a US entity that's our operating entity in the States. I think that there is a level of complexity around whether you have the investment coming into an American entity or whether they're as the head, you know, the head co. And I think there's a lot of advisors that can talk to that. I think the key requirement is to have the massive market in the States where the buyers are, from what the conversations I've had so far. That's obviously a massive prerequisite. But they seem to be, again, a bit edgier, a bit willing to push into some of the new spaces in court tech and in our area anyway, dispute tech, and to start to move away from all of the more traditional legal techs that were the original starting point for this industry.
I mean, one thing I find just categorizing legal tech companies that I know are from, for example, New Zealand, or I know are from Australia, but then next thing you know, on LinkedIn, the headquarters is the US. Even when sometimes the founders themselves or the CEO are still listed as being in Australia. And so sometimes, I don't know if that's a perception thing or what, but I see that throughout the world where companies, you can see them quite clearly being of a certain origin, but now headquartered in the US.
It's interesting. There's certainly a push to move. I mean, a lot of people have said to me, are you moving? So I think that that's obviously quite important, I think, in their eyes, that there is definitely, you know, customer service and support and, you know, COO or something sitting there that can carry it forward.
Should we stick with this topic in terms of the market sizing? We've been talking about a few things that lead to it. Should we just skip to that at the moment and just flesh that out a bit more? Laura, do you want to kind of continue on that train of thought for a bit?
In terms of buying behaviours, you mean?
No, just in terms of the market size of Australia and New Zealand. We know it's small, and there does tend to be this point in time where one of the founding team or someone senior establishes a beachhead in a bigger market like the US. It almost seems like the done thing. Just to follow on from that.
I think it almost has to be. I mean, the size of the market and the opportunities, I mean, particularly if you look at our sector, which is bridging litigation and courts. And, you know, one court in Los Angeles, the Superior Court, would have more court staff and more users than the whole of Australia and New Zealand combined. So it's not just the fact that they seem to be quite progressive. It's literally just the size. I mean, you can't ignore it. And then you've got, you know, as Sasha said, Europe and London as well, which major dominating player. So it would be very difficult, I think, to build, you know, a global, a company with global aspirations without looking fairly quickly to those markets. I think there is a bit of a theory that runs around that you need to establish yourself wholly here first and then pick that up and try to carry it offshore. We went for it and decided to go and try to capture the trend of our particular sector that's on fire at the moment, and it seems to have been a good move, even though you might say that we hadn't saturated the Australian market by any stretch, but we're certainly getting a lot of good learnings and everything's resonating there. So, you know, we've bucked the trend a little bit and it seems to be working so far. I don't know what others have experienced. What
do you think, Michael or Sasha?
Well, the US is obviously an interesting market and one that we've looked at several times. In the contract review space, particularly once you start dealing with things like marking up contracts and the like, there are regulatory issues in the US that you don't have in perhaps some other jurisdictions, and perhaps you don't have in some other fields as well. And it's been interesting seeing that some of the big contract review platforms were in fact not based in the US, been based in London or in Canada, because that's perhaps a more regulatory friendly environment for those type of platforms. So that is one of the reasons why we're continuing to think about the US, and I certainly take what Laura says about if you want to be anywhere, you probably need to be in the US eventually. But it is one where you've got to look carefully at the regulatory framework there and see, is it in fact friendly to your particular platform before you make that jump.
And are you referring to the practice of law type regulatory issues there, Michael?
I'm talking about the legal advice type issues there, and very aggressive bar associations that they have in the United States that we, in Australia, I think the regulator, you could characterise the regulator as adopting a wait and see approach, which hasn't given us any comfort or any guidance, but at least means we, by and large, there's a few anecdotal stories of regulators picking up the phone, but by and large, our field has not been troubled by the regulators in Australia. In the US, the bar associations have done more than trouble legal tech companies, have taken them to court. And that is obviously something that focuses the mind when you're wondering whether you should be making the plunge over there.
I guess we don't have that because we're agnostic as to what people are doing on the platform.
Yes.
And
That's right.
It's our people sit in the centre. Even if they're lawyers, they're still, that it's a video-based collaboration tool, so you don't have that issue of actually providing the advice through the tool.
Yep.
It is slightly different, but I'm aware of some consumer-based legal tools in the States where there was definitely that legislation required to enable them to have lawyers involved.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting space, and I think what I'd add to it is, I guess, the strategic decision making that a tech company has to make. And I think what we're seeing in to get traction in the US and the UK or Europe is probably needing to have people on the ground there, and that's then a strategic decision, and usually requires some investment and restructuring. I think we are so lucky. One of the silver linings from COVID is that we can do so much virtually, and so we can support our teams in those markets, and we can do so much from Australia and New Zealand. But I think at the end of the day, you still need to have those strategic hires in those markets to be able to get that traction, and that's the challenge that that we all face as legal tech businesses. It's all about timing when you do it, and and how aggressively you go after it. Yeah, exactly. And it's all about investment and timing, and it's not, they're not easy decisions to make. These are actually big decisions, because if you don't pull them off successfully, then it does have consequences.
Yeah, big decision for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I want to maybe just step back a little bit and go into the next kind of just to really drill down on what our markets look like in terms of the number of legal tech companies that are in New Zealand or Australia. Who are the major pillars of infrastructure? So the hubs, the peak bodies, the events, the major events that are there, or even law firm accelerators. And Jean, just to loop you in here, who are the main players in the New Zealand legal tech market?
This could be quite a quick section. Well, look, we've got a pretty small sort of sector here in New Zealand in terms of the number of companies that are really trying to build their own legal tech. There's been a few successes in the AML space, and Lawview are obviously a standout in the sort of the matter management legal operations space. But there aren't the same number of companies certainly that even you'd see in Australia, and there has been a sort of a grouping of Legal Tech NZ, which has not really been particularly active, certainly again not to the same sort of extent as in Australia. So I think the main source of information, or the most active source of information, would probably be the CLI. I think, in terms of just the amount of content that's published that's sort of relevant for lawyers over here. ALPMA is another really useful resource. There's one main legal tech conference, which is Lawfest, which I had notes down here to say that it was going to be on 2nd of June, but Terry's just told me that it may have been another victim of COVID, and it's been pushed back until later in the year. So that would be the main event where people would typically meet to find out what's happening, and to sort of see what products are available in the market. So yeah, it's a pretty small body, but it was interesting just reflecting on some of the comments about, would you try and build a legal tech solution, in New Zealand for the New Zealand market? No, I think it's pretty clear that, sort of the companies very quickly start looking to Australia and further afield. From our perspective, I guess we sort of look at it and think, there are still some pretty major issues here, which, the legal tech can help with. And so, a lot of what we've been doing, I suppose, is looking at what technology is available and, whether it's from New Zealand or Australia or elsewhere, and how that can be applied to sort of solve some of those bigger problems. And I think there is a lot of untapped potential there. And that's, probably just forces you to think a little bit more creatively. Maybe it's not so much a case of custom building everything for one particular use case, but thinking more towards productization and how you can design a solution for a sector and optimize, I guess, the different technologies that you're going to use to be able to do that. So that's probably the approach that we've seen and taking ourselves down here, is to sort of try and find bigger problems that that you can solve, even if it's not necessarily sort of heavily sort of dependent on huge numbers of users or licensing for the technology.
Yeah. Well, in terms of the Aussie market, it's a bit bigger, not huge by world standard, but maybe we punch according to our weight, or maybe slightly above. There's about, by my count, about 80 or so legal tech. And when I define legal tech, it's mostly in that sort of more startup space. It's not all technology companies, to be honest, that I've tended to cover. It's mostly been the more emerging technology companies that have started. So I sit at about 80 or so. And then in terms of the major, like the peak bodies, we've got ALTA, the Australian Legal Technology Association. Different law societies also have quite strong innovation arms, the state-based law societies as well. And then, of course, we've got CLE, Centre for Legal Innovation, does a stellar job, certainly in this country and, of course, in New Zealand as well. So they're a couple of the big, bodies of legal technology information, or hubs. We've also got a couple of law firm accelerators that are currently on the go. So there's Lander and Rogers have their law tech hub. And then also Allen's has a relatively recent accelerator called Octus, maybe in their first or second cohort. And at one point a few years ago, and I think, Michael, you went through Mills Oakley Accelerator as well, didn't you?
That's right, I did. And that was a very worthwhile experience. And I'm aware of a couple of law firms doing that since. Just in terms of the number of legal tech companies in Australia, David, you're, of course, an original founding member of ALTA. You were there when it formed. And I think at that very first meeting, I think we had 12 members of ALTA. We've now got 80 members of ALTA. So that is 80 companies that are legal tech companies. Some of them are in stealth mode, and that's why you might not have heard of them. My guess is actually there's probably more. My guess is probably another 40 or so legal tech companies out there that for one reason or another haven't yet joined ALTA, but we hope they will soon. So I think the numbers are a little bit higher. There is a bit of a problem with, I think, startups in general, but with legal tech, of companies operating in stealth mode for too long. And I think it's just really important for companies to get out there and get in the market and start getting feedback from the market of their platforms, so that they can work out what they need to do to make it a market winner. And hearing what Laura said about the advantages of going to the US, you get a lot of learnings from going to a big market there, which I think could radically reshape the way that you're going to be making your platform. And the sooner you get those learnings, the better off you're going to be. In terms of big events in Australia, I'd of course refer to AltaCon, which we've now held 4 times. We're giving it a break this year and we're doing something different, but that has been absolutely fantastic in terms of showcasing Australian legal tech to lots of different people. But there is nothing that beats doing it face to face. We've done it virtually for the last couple of years. It's been great, but it's a hard slog. So we're really looking forward to one day being able to doing it face to face again. And finally, I'm going to make a shout out to a new branch of ALTA, the women in Australian legal tech, so WALTA. And that is and I'm really pleased to see that we've got both Sasha and Laura here today on this platform, that's unfortunately not representative of the proportion of founders in Australia of Legaltech who are women. And Alta has recognised this and is really taking great steps to give greater prominence to legal tech companies that are founded by women under the Walter badge. So yeah, watch this space. There's going to be some big things happening from Walter this year.
To your knowledge, Michael, is that the only one in the world where it's female-focused representation of legal tech companies?
As far as I'm aware, yes. I know when we started Walter in about October last year, we were definitely the only one there. It is a global field. I'm sure other people have seen what we're doing, and I wouldn't be surprised if other people start copying what we're doing, but I think we were there first. Very good, very good.
Well, Laura, I just wanted to bring you in here. We've talked about some key trends. We've talked about that shifting to bigger markets. You could continue with that, or are there any other big trends that you're seeing in this market, whether that be particular categories gaining traction, or I don't know, whether, you know, what are customers doing? Are they building their own, or licensing technology, or something else completely different in terms of trends?
Yeah, I mean, one of the trends that we've seen, I think, in our segment is a little bit unusual, I guess, is that the governments are actually leading the charge, particularly in New Zealand. The New Zealand government seems very progressive in terms of its willingness to adopt new strategies to deal with some of the issues we've seen with dispute resolution systems and complaints management systems falling over. And by that, I'm referencing, you know, what's been going on in Canberra and in sport and other sectors where it's locking into the Me Too movement and people coming out saying that there's been a big issue for way too long. So we're seeing New Zealand really leading there, and that's been brilliant because it's starting to produce case studies for other parts of the world. But it's definitely for us in reverse order, you know, corporates, probably the least, then law firms, then government, in our particular segment of dispute resolution technology. We're starting to see, I think, particularly coming from the United States and maybe starting to be reflected here, a bit more of a move to B2C. I mean, obviously this industry really started with B2B and that's where the bulk of it still is, but the spirit of moving to that B2C type service delivery is starting to emerge. And I think that's probably where we'll start to see real impact, particularly on the law firms themselves and the legal industry having to evaluate where it sits in relation to the provision of legal information and even advice through some of the slightly more progressive AI tools and others that are moving in the market. Just one point finally, while I've got the talking stick on the stealth mode element. I mean, we did that. I was building a mediation for 2 years before we came out from stealth mode, and I hear what Michael says, but I mean, it's one of those things where if you've got your day job, it's quite hard to manage, you know, having your day job and your reputation in a particular profession as well as having the company. So anything that the regulators can do to ease people's mind on that, and the law firms can do to encourage innovation, I think is really good, because there are a lot of people out there, I'm sure, trying to do the side hustle and wondering when they'll switch over. And I've literally just switched completely over after nearly 5 years. So it's, you know, it's quite a balancing act for a very long time if you want to be able to pay the bills and produce something worthwhile in the market.
Yeah, that's a really interesting observation with stealth mode, and in startup culture, there's a very strong push towards building in public and getting that feedback really quickly. But you know, if you've got the day job and you're running a business on the side, it definitely. I've had many private conversations with people that are building and moonlighting while they've got their full-time job and working weekends and night. And sometimes there is that tension to be able to come out working on something different when you're supposed to be dedicated full-time to your employer.
Yeah, and I mean, particularly also selling to lawyers. I mean, we know how particular and, you know, conservative lawyers are. And so my view was always it needs to be good. You know, it can't be an MVP, it needs to be good. And, you know, that seems, I think, to have proven to be the case. But, you know, you can't put something into a law firm that's half-baked like you might be able to if it was in a different industry. So I think it's that particular aspect of it that maybe makes it harder for lawyers, as well as being perfectionists, which tends to drive us to want to do things very well in everything that we're doing. So yeah, it is good to get out from under the covers as soon as you can. I echo what Michael says there.
And not only are we inherently perfectionists, we are also inherently incredibly critical. And so if you're trying to sell a product to an audience which contains some lawyers, it's got to be nearly 100%, because if it's only 95%, the lawyers will say, what about this? And throw the whole lot out. And yeah, speaking as a lawyer myself, I know where they're coming from, but gee, it makes it hard to sell.
Sometimes I wonder whether the 80-20 rule actually applies to lawyers.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't. It's 99.
No. There is no such thing as a small mistake for a lawyer.
No, the lawyers in my team point out, the apostrophe's in the wrong place and it drives the engineers batty, but that's just life in the law.
That probably feeds in a little bit to what we've seen, and perhaps a little different to Laura's comments. I think it's easier to sell into business because sometimes you can actually, if you're talking to the business owner or the business process owner, they probably are more aligned to their 80-20 and is it better than what we've currently got, and it's not the same perfectionism. So we've done some really good projects where there haven't been any lawyers involved, no internal lawyer, no external lawyer, just somebody who's got a problem and they're keen to get it fixed. And you're building law into their business process, and they can see the connection between what you're doing and the problem it solves and the return on investment. So it's probably made it easier in that sense to sort of be able to talk to our corporate about sort of how you can help. Law firms, I think, struggle with that a bit. There is the perfectionism, and also perhaps they're not necessarily seeing the whole of the process, so they sort of they don't quite have that view about whether to make more money or to take cost out or quite how that fits. And government we've found quite hard, just in the sense that you've got IT and procurement invariably have to be involved and can often kill something quite quickly, and procurement rules. And it's really hard to add value to a situation when you're responding to an RFP and they've basically told you what the solution needs to be before you've had a chance to actually understand what the problem was. So I think those are all sort of challenges we'll probably see here in New Zealand that I imagine will be the same across most jurisdictions.
Yeah.
How about you, Sasha, in terms of key trends? What are you seeing in the market here?
I think that we were so lucky because it was 6 years ago now that we started Legaltech, and I think it's even more challenging now. I think in some ways the legal tech market has matured, so there's more awareness. In the early days, there was so much education that we had to do just around the types of things that we were doing in this space. But I think for a new legal tech company, the hardest part is getting that traction, getting those first sales, because everyone is always like, who else is using it? Who else is using it? There's a very, very small percentage of people, especially in the legal space, that are going to put themselves out on a limb and be innovative and try something new. And you've got to first of all find that 1 or 2% of people and get them to give it a go. And I think the other, getting that sales traction and getting across, crossing that chasm, so making it into mainstream and getting some of those really great mainstream referral clients is so tough. And I think probably it's tougher now. The other thing to throw in the mix is cybersecurity. So you've got to be actually really good with your tech, and you actually have to have really high levels now. So actually the barriers to entry into this market are so much more challenging than they were many years ago. You have to have everything, all your ducks in a row, because the risk of it not being right, and then a law firm or a corporate or even a consumer using your product, and then the wheels falling off in terms of a cyber breach is that's just really challenging. So there's a lot of things to consider. It's not an easy market to be operating in.
Are you talking a bit about around some of the certifications, some of those ISO certifications, SOC 1, SOC 2, that type of thing?
Oh yeah, and that's just the start of it, David. So what we're seeing now in the last 12 months, 18 months is just the security requirements that we're getting from our clients, and prospective clients is just astronomical. Some of the surveys and reports and things like that we have to routinely go through is extraordinary. There was one particular one. It was days of work in terms of going through and providing all of the due diligence, and they were for an existing customer. So there's, it's not just enough to have our ISO certification and everything else. It's everything else. It's all those other operational security structures that a legal tech business needs to have.
And that's an extra cost that the legal tech company then has to surmount when they're trying to sell to a particular customer, because not only do you have to answer a 25-page security questionnaire, each of the questionnaires are subtly different from each of the others. And it's very hard to justify the cost of doing that when you're just at a tender stage and there's no guarantee you're in fact going to get the gig in the end place. So it's another barrier to entry.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
You've got to have the person who actually is the expert in that as well. You either have to outsource or have them on staff, and to be able to afford someone who, is at the standard of a CSTO is not cheap. So there is that chasm between I've got a really great idea and I've actually built something, and then getting it into market. I think it's a double-edged sword really, because you have to have those referenceable clients in order to get funding, and then how do you get them when you're not quite good enough? It's definitely not for the faint-hearted.
Yeah.
And then you've got to do it all over again when you go into a new market again, because they're all the same. Who else in this market is using it? You've got to cross the chasm in every other jurisdiction that you go into. So it's not easy.
Well, the slightly good news on the answering the IT security questionnaires is there's now AI-based tech that helps you answer these questions from a knowledge base, et cetera, et cetera. So check those out. If
send us links, send links.
I will. Just broadly speaking, in terms of corporates and law firms, you each probably sell to slightly different markets. Do you have a sense in this market whether the law firms are ahead of the curve compared to the corporates, or in-house, or is it vice versa?
I think in our space, it's corporates ahead of the law firms. The law firms are doing a great job in using established legal tech for things like due diligence, discovery, research, that type of thing. Some of the traditional stables of legal tech, law firms are using that now very effectively. I'm seeing less appetite from law firms for some of the more adventurous, novel legal technologies. And there I'm seeing the corporates much more prepared, perhaps because, as we were talking about before, corporates actually do know of the 80-20 rule. And so they're prepared perhaps to look at the newer legal technologies if they can see a business case for supporting it. That's what it comes down to with corporates, finding the business case to give them that return on investment quickly. They will then manage the 80-20 in a way that law firms perhaps don't have the luxury of doing.
Yeah, I think the other comment on there, and again, if we think back to porters, drivers, and things like that, one of the challenges that we face in legal tech is there are some organisations, corporates, and probably mostly in the corporate side, that are still trying to answer that question of why should we be investing in legal tech, and then so if they're not looking, if they decide, okay, well, we're not going to be looking at legal tech, what they are replacing that with is their existing enterprise systems, so that investing in resources or people to configure their own systems. So they are alternatives, and they are our competitors as well, because they're going to be using their existing sort of tech stack to try and piece some of that together. So that's again some of the challenges that we're facing. And I think the other sort of driver that we're seeing, certainly in looking at the corporates and their buying behavior, luckily corporates are buying at the moment, so that's really great news. But they are again trying to solve the question of how do we get all of our systems working together. So lots more demands around integrations. And I think companies like ourselves need to be more agile in the way that we're approaching that. So for ourselves at Legaltech, we've now got our core integration layer, which along with our sort of plugin infrastructure, means that we're trying to solve for that and be able to do integrations in a bit more of a an agile way. But I think that's a challenge for corporates, is how do they, if they do invest in new tech, how do they get things working together? And the question is, why should they be investing in legal tech? And so I think that's, I guess, a problem that we would, I'd like to see sort of solved, putting together some good cases for why they should be doing that.
What's your perspective on that, Jean, working with corporates and law firms?
Yeah, look, I think I would say the corporates are ahead. It's not, often they've got some pretty foundational issues that they need to sort out. They can't even file their emails and find their Word documents. So there's an element of meeting people where they are, and I'm on a workshop tomorrow with the company, which is very much just focused on how they can improve their use of SharePoint and Microsoft 365 suite. And the original conversation started with the idea that they needed to get a matter management system, but in digging into it, it was really because they thought that would be the only way that they could actually file their emails and Word documents. So, there's challenges of so many different options out there, and kind of perhaps a lack of support from internal resources in some cases that perhaps drives people to sort of look for silver bullets and another system rather than being able to use what they've got. But I think Sasha's right. If you can get the integration sort of and join things up, that the opportunity is just so much larger to make an impact. And so while a law firm, the conversation might be about maybe it takes 6 or 8 hours to prepare a set of documents, something like that. And so you're quite finite in terms of where you think you can add the value. Whereas if you sort of look at the company that might be sort of running that process, you might be taking a 4-week process down to a day or less, and there's just massive value for them and being able to service their customer base more efficiently, or avoid huge cost overruns from delays, or there's inflation everywhere at the moment. So I think that's what's sort of driving perhaps a bit of a change. The other corporates are perhaps more motivated by some challenges that they're getting, whereas law firms are doing pretty well, right? There's a lot of work around and everybody's busy, and they perhaps haven't got quite the same drivers as well.
Well, just to carry on to the next sort of broader theme around the big challenges, we could either kick off with you, Jean, or if anyone else wants to chime in with what you're seeing as the biggest challenge that you're seeing in the market. Let's dive into that.
Well, if I carry on, I think that the biggest challenge that we see, probably at least in the in-house, is invariably the legal teams don't have control over the technology that they use. So you can have a great conversation with somebody about the problem and the kind of what good would look like and what the impact would be, but if you have to go to the IT team and get their support, then it can quite often run into a developer that wants to build their own solution, or that they say they've got some other software that apparently will be able to do the same thing, or procurement will have a view as to what process needs to be followed. And I think it just really makes it hard for the lawyers who are really busy with the day job, and they're trying to find a way to get things done. But if it gets too hard, they can sort of decide just to leave it and move on. And the opportunity cost might be huge, but it's not what people are currently being measured and incentivized by. So I think that's probably what we see as being probably the hardest rule in the corporate space. Government procurement rules make it that much harder on the government side. That'd be the two biggest headwinds we see.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head, Jean. I completely agree with everything that you've said.
Do you sort of bring it down to lawyers deserve their own toys too?
I wouldn't say it's lawyers and their own toys. I actually think that it's better to think of the stuff as not being legal tech, so lawyers, but there's got to be a bigger context, like if it's 5 years ago we were all talking about lawyers need tools to make their lives more interesting and they can do better productive work. I think we all kind of know that nobody really cares about that, and it's not an argument that will help with getting the CFO or others on board. So I think it really is just trying to figure out what's the business problem that we're trying to solve here, and how does the legal team actually take kind of some of the stuff out into the business. So one example here in New Zealand has been in the news a lot recently is consumer credit laws changed on the 1st of December, and it's just been carnage in the sense people are being told now by their bank that they can't borrow money because it's got Netflix, or they have too much takeaways, or it's some very, very prescriptive rules come in around affordability and suitability. And lawyers have given a lot of detailed advice about what the regulations say, and people have tried to interpret that in terms of what they will do, which is still being done using PDF forms, pretty manual processes. And I think what we're seeing is you just can't actually manage that level of data collection and the sort of application of it under these new rules to create an efficient, sensible process. And so I think they're being overly conservative, most likely declining loans that they otherwise wouldn't need to, because you just can't. It's not profitable to have people reviewing months and months worth of bank statements line by line and trying to sort of build a model around it. So I think there's that type of scenario is where we see opportunities for what you might call legal tech, or it could be tech that lawyers can use. But really, it's like, how could we turn this into like a really awesome customer experience where somebody just wants to do something quite simple? I want to borrow some money, I want to apply for it, I want to get a quick decision, and if it's approved, I want to sign my documents and get my money. So it's really how do you take the sort of that problem and then find the technology that you can use to do it. And there are some tools out there that businesses already have, but I think they do have gaps in there, and that's why the legal tech sector is thriving, because it's coming from people who have seen that problem and they've created really great solutions for it. And it's just building that awareness that we're not trying to say don't use your other systems. We're not trying to say chuck them out, but we're saying there are gaps here. And if you just slot these things in and integrate them, then you could actually have an amazing customer experience and full legal compliance, and the ability to be able to demonstrate that to the regulators at any time. And I think that's really where the big opportunity lies. And those are big sectors and big problems. So I think even in a small country like New Zealand, there's no reason why that couldn't actually be a really attractive proposition. So for legal tech companies. And no doubt that the problems in the US and the UK would be many, many, many times greater and even more attractive to solve over there. But that's where we see that there's a big opportunity.
Challenge and an opportunity. Michael, Laura, or Sasha, do you want to jump in with any thoughts?
From our end, I mean, what we're seeing is that the pandemic brought a massive wave of people realizing that they could work digitally, which is fantastic. And obviously provided the opportunity, but then you've got the big players coming in, which are really just not necessarily suitable for legal use. Your Zoom, your Teams, your Google Sheets and all of those. Well, they're definitely not suitable, but it's that, well, how do you compete against a massive global organisation when everybody uses that, and they sort of, in a way, until they realise that there's something else that's going to solve that 20 or 30% of the gap, then they're not even necessarily looking. So obviously the way we're solving that is to partner with people like Microsoft to go, well, here's your bog standard Teams, but here's something specific for the lawyers. But that's definitely the biggest challenge we face is the fact that these large organisations have captured the budget and the market, and they're bolted on, and you definitely can't shift them. You've got to show that you're providing cream on the top of that solution as well. So quite similar to what Jean was saying there about the complacency or the other tools that already exist, that even if they're not great.
I think something that I agree entirely, Laura, with that. I think something that will help is as we get more well-publicised success stories of where legal tech has been used, and we get some law firms and companies prepared to put their name to it and say, yep, we used legal tech and we got this saving. And that will then help establish it. A good example of this that occurred, you referred to the pandemic, as well as making everyone work remotely, it also created new avenues of work for legal tech. One example, Queensland Investment Corp, I don't know if you know their use case for the legal tech. They had to write to all of their tenants and tell them about the rent relief available under the mandatory code. Not a complicated task, but a big one, and needing to be done under a very tight time frame. They turned to Neota, and Neota developed an app for them in record time, which resulted, and QIC has said publicly, they saved multiple millions of dollars through doing that. 1,600 letters written with minimal legal lawyer involvement as a result of the app that Neota helped develop. I think we need more success stories of that out in the public domain so people can get courage in saying, I'm not the first person to be doing this. It is in fact a legitimate solution to a problem, and let's give it a go.
We happen to build a little proof of concept for the exact same use case, unless you're talking about residential tenants, but we did one for commercial landlords on the rent abatement, rent relief, and what tenants would be available to. So yeah, built the same thing on checkbox as a proof of concept.
Yep.
And I just wanted to round this out. If each of you can just call out, one or two of the legal tech companies that you're keeping an eye on, you think are really impressive in this market. Just name a few names for us to go check out.
The two tools that I really actually like are Draftable, which is a tool that compares PDFs. It's a very simple thing, but if you've been a lawyer and you've had to compare two PDFs before, it's actually a nightmare. So that's one that I recommend having a look at. eBrief Ready, I think, is also a really good tool for compiling briefs and court books and things and getting that into a searchable bundle. We're doing an integration with them at the moment, and it's just the number of barristers, I think, who've actually adopted Legaltech probably for the first time because they've tried eBrief Ready is really impressive.
Who's the founder of eBrief Ready, Laura?
Stephen Foley.
Yeah, okay, so it's great to see another Australian legal tech company. Of course, Stephen, I think, founded Australia's first legal tech company.
TA Law?
Yeah.
TA Law, yeah.
Yeah, back, it would be over 20 years now. When you see a graph of the growth of the Australian legal tech industry, there's a blip about 20 years ago, and that's Stephen. And then not much happens, and now, of course, 80, 100 members. But yeah, that's a great solution. One that I like is another Melbourne-based product, actually, Setify, and formed by a couple of junior lawyers who realised the inefficiency in taking instructions on matters for the first time with the client sitting in the office, and how much could be done online before people actually front up to the office. And so Setify is actually an online client induction tool in the family law space, which cuts down immensely that time spent during that first meeting and makes that first meeting, when you actually do have it, so much more productive. Been picked up by lots of small to medium-sized law firms in Australia, and going back to what we we're talking about at the very start of this call, now in the United Kingdom and looking at the United States. So really nice to see. Still a very small team, but very successful product. I'm watching it.
There's a couple of products that I particularly like. So it's not this one's, so Net Documents, for example, they're not an Australian tech company, but their product, I believe, is excellent and really solving that problem, Jean, that you mentioned, which is about filing emails, finding documents. That's one that I particularly like. Another Australian business that we've been doing a lot of work with is a tech partner called FYB, and they do a lot of work in government for government systems and connecting things to government systems. And they've been working with us on building a connector between Lawcadia and Content Manager, which is the system that governments are using as part of their records management. And they're doing some, really interesting stuff for us, but also for, just generally in that space. And again, that's another Australian business that I've been really impressed, when working with. And I think otherwise there's so many other, great businesses out there. I think Joseph are doing amazing things with their chatbot, and that's certainly something that's, quite unique in the market.
Yeah. It's so easy to use. That's the advantage of Joseph. You just pick it up and drag and drop. It's great. Yeah.
So I would say from an Australasian perspective, particularly the meta management space, really punching above the weight globally there. I think you've got Lawview from New Zealand, and then Sasha's Lawcadia and Zakia as well. And I think all of those systems are really great, and they've all got sort of real strengths in particular areas. I just think the other excellent solutions, and obviously starting to do well internationally as well. So that would be three that I think people should look at. And if I chuck in a quick plug for document automation, there was a series we did last year based around document automation, and you can go and look up the details. But there's companies like Hot Docs, Avoca, Checkbox, Joseph, and Neota were all part of that series, and will be well worth having a look at as part of that deep dive series.
Nice one. I'll just throw my one out there. The Prepared company, which I think used to be called Be Prepared. And this is a platform to sort of manage your post-life digital assets. So, if the worst comes to worst, or you're incapacitated, you've got your Facebook logins and your crypto and all that sort of stuff. And how does that get managed? And I don't know the founding story too much, but I do know they're targeting more law firms, wills and estates practitioners these days with more of a B2B product. But I remember when that came through, I wasn't sure how to categorize it. So I did categorize it as death tech, which there is actually a category for that type of thing. And it was the first one in the law hackers that I'd come across. So that's, but I'd like to get to know those guys a bit better.
David, it sounds like we're all going to need to get to know those folks one time or another. Thank you so much for an amazing session. That's a wrap for our first in this series of Legal Tech Around the World, this one in Australia and New Zealand. Don't forget to tune in for episode number 2, which is going to be focusing on legal tech in Africa. Thank you so much again, David, and in council, just an amazing collaboration and very, very grateful for it. Thank you also to our fabulous panellists, Jean, Sasha, Laura and Michael. Really, really appreciate your time and contribution as well. Please also feel free and do contact folks that you've seen in this series, whether it's David, myself, the Centre for Legal Innovation, in council, or of course, any one of our amazing panellists. You'll find us all in one iteration or another on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. That's it for this time. Thank you very, very much, everyone, for attending, and we're really, really looking forward to seeing you in episode 2. Until next time, bye.